Hello, my name is Katie Jackson. I am one of the devisers and performers of EEL, or EEL, and I will be talking to you today about rehearsing on Zoom. So, one of the main things about working on Zoom, especially because more often than not you are working in your own space, so your bedroom or your living room, one of the main things is preparing and protecting your space. It's really useful for your own mental health, especially as Zoom is very taxing on our brains, to create a psychological divide of your workspace and your personal space if you can. When we were doing EEL, we were all performing in our respective homes. My desk was set up for my character to perform in my bedroom. But it's important to separate the two worlds, so I very simply turned my desk at a 90-degree angle to where it usually sits, so that I had a different wall behind me and a different view of my room when I was sat at it. When I sat at my desk in this orientation, it meant that I was in performance mode, and when I reorientated it back around, it meant I was back in my personal space mode. Another important part of that is ensuring you maintain your personal privacy as well, because as much as the audience, if they choose to have their cameras on for the performance, are allowing you and the other audience members into their home, you're also showing them yours. So it's important that you choose how much of your personal space you allow other people to see so that you're protecting your privacy as well. There are some interesting challenges to performing on Zoom, and rehearsing is the time to figure those out. So how much can you change your space for the sake of the design of the piece? I have a white wall, which I used as the backdrop for the show, mostly because another wall in my bedroom is bright green and didn't really seem appropriate for the performance. So the 90-degree swivel of my desk was also partly to do with making this world look as bland and uniform as possible. At the same time, we're all students, so we don't have resources, we don't want to spend lots of money drastically redecorating the spaces we're in, mostly because also we wouldn't get our deposits back if we did. Now, the swivelling of my desk was a simple solution because I'm lucky enough to have a neutral coloured wall in my room. If you don't have these resources, though, how creative can you be with what you use your space for? It's also important to consider the idea of, do you want to leave your rehearsal space set up as it would be for the performance when you're not rehearsing, or do you want to put your room back together as it normally would be? Can you use the setting up of your space as a way of getting yourself warmed up and into the headspace for rehearsing, or is it easier for you to use it as it is and arrive at rehearsals ready to go without having to worry too much about moving furniture around? So the next big part of rehearsals is, of course, working with the text. We learned quite quickly working on our text that it's pretty important that trying to have the script on your screen at the same time as having the Zoom call running is pretty untenable, really. Either you're flicking between the two windows or else you're exclusively looking at your script. You're never looking at Zoom, and then you're not connecting with your scene partner or the company in general. So if you can, it's really useful to be off book for the beginning of the rehearsal process, especially because everything takes a little bit longer on Zoom. So you bank hours back for yourself by turning up on day one already off book. We had quite a lengthy textual analysis or table work period on Zoom as we were preparing for the show. This was really useful, especially because this was a devising process, for us to clarify the characters and make sure we were, combing through the text, checking how dramaturgically watertight these people were. It's also very useful to know what the other actors are thinking in terms of their intentions and tactics in the scene. We went through and actioned the script together, so I knew that, okay, at that moment, Maggie is in this place and taking Hargraves in this direction, so if that's her intention in this scene, what would my counter objective or obstacle be? How much am I working with her? How much am I working against her? We found that to be more important on Zoom than it is in a live rehearsal process, because you're not all you're seeing of the other person is what their camera shows you. You're not able to read as much of their body language. So having a bit more intellectual knowledge of what they're thinking and where they're coming from helped us connect a little bit better with each other and stay in the scene. Moving on, speaking of the cameras limiting what you see, you have complete control over what the audience sees of your space and your body depending on how you angle your camera. This can be a good thing because, again, it goes back to protecting your space, protecting your privacy, but it is an important thing to think about in terms of the characterization in rehearsals. How much does this character move around the space? How much do they pick up their camera and carry it around the room with them? How much do they come in and out of shot entirely? Maggie played a very static character and was always framed very neatly in her shot, whereas Ludwig was almost at the other end of the spectrum of physicality and was moving around quite a lot. He was also using the full depth and width of what the camera could see. So, rehearsals are the time to decide how much you want to play with what the audience does and doesn't see, and also to think about why your character might not want them to see certain things. If you're creating a world where characters have to share the performance space while performing from different locations, how do you sell that to an audience? The three of us were clearly in 3 very different locations, but what if you want to set your play in a way that involves your characters having their conversation in the same room? Again, we go back to the physical design. How universal can you make your room in comparison to the spaces that the others are working in? How can you all meet in the middle about that? Do you use virtual backgrounds rather than your real space as an aid to sell that more? And further to that, if you are creating a world where, say, characters have to move from room to room in a house, for example, and they're both in the living room and then they both have to go into the kitchen, but the 2 actors are working in separate performance spaces in different locations, how do you sell that? If, say, character A is standing in the kitchen and they have the oven behind them, and character B is standing in the kitchen and they have the sink behind them, a useful tool to help you sort of figure this all out is to draw a ground plan of the world that these characters exist in, and then you can track their movements around the house or the school or the office, wherever it is that they are, so that you know exactly in terms of, okay, so the oven is opposite the sink, so if I'm standing with the oven behind me and character B is standing with the sink behind them, we're opposite each other. Whereas if in the ground plan you decide that the oven and the sink should be next to each other, then we're standing next to each other, and it can help you figure out exactly where eyeline-wise, physicality-wise, how are you turning your body to express to the audience that you're talking to this person and that you're sharing a space. It is a long task, I won't lie, but it does save you huge amounts of time in the long run, and it really helps you create the world and lock in your relation to each other in it and help you sell that to the audience. Now, we had audience participation in our show, which is something we knew from the beginning we definitely wanted to include. But of course, how do you rehearse audience participation? It's hard to do with stage shows. It's even harder to do on Zoom in a way, because you need to make sure that the audience are able to stay on board and keep up with what you're asking them to do, even more so on Zoom. You've got to be watching them, scanning all of their faces, checking that your instructions kind of make sense as much as possible. So we actually had one of our lecturers, who is a little less Zoom savvy, shall we say, come in and be our guinea pig for a couple of sessions so that we could make absolutely sure that what we were doing was crystal clear as possible to her, that we were making sure our pacing of giving the instructions was easy to keep up with, because again, if you rush through instructions, some people will get totally lost, and then it's much harder on Zoom to help them catch up to everyone else than it would be in a live room. Also, the simple factor that it's much more sort of damaging to an audience's sense of enjoyment if they feel like they're being left behind in Zoom than in a live show. We sort of seem to take it more personally when we can't keep up with technology issues than if we can't keep up with what somebody's telling us when we're in a room with them. So if you want to do audience participation, get friends involved, get older relatives, perhaps you may need a little bit, who they might need some extra coaching, because actually it's really valuable to know what it's like to struggle with Zoom audience participation and what you can do to make it easier for an audience member who is. When you do rehearse audience participation on Zoom, again, I would say is as soon as possible. Get it into your body, get it into the script. We were very lucky. The recording of the performance was actually a dress rehearsal of ours, which the rest of our cohort very kindly came in as a full test audience for us, because we needed to try all of these things on real people now. And it was a moving on stage from trying it out with one person to trying it out with 15 people simultaneously, because once we got it into the performances, we knew that we were going to be dealing with not only a larger number of people, but a larger mix of ability. So as soon as you can, but certainly at the latest, dress rehearsal if you haven't had any practice with it yet. And finally, the most important tip for rehearsing on Zoom is breaks. Make sure you are taking as many breaks as you can. There is no such thing as soldiering on with Zoom. You will only be doing damage to your energy levels. You can't just power through. So we were working off the model of 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off. So if we started rehearsals at 10 a.m, we would stop at 10:50 and have a 10-minute break, start back at 11. And that was every hour throughout the day, and then an hour for lunch. The other important thing that is really hard to do, and certainly I preach it more than I practice it, is using the screen breaks as screen breaks, because it's not going to give your brain the rest and the reset that it needs if you turn your microphone and video off on Zoom and then you go on Facebook or you check your Twitter or anything like that. You all know this by now, I'm sure, having spent a lot of time with online learning. But it is especially important during rehearsals because you're outputting information a lot more than you're inputting it. So you're having to be the driving force in rehearsals a little bit more than you would be in a lecture or a seminar. So what can you do with your screen break time? I found listening to the radio really useful, just 5 minutes of like catching the headlines or whatever it is, just to make sure that I'm keeping in touch with the outside world, because again, rehearsing on Zoom, you're in your own space constantly. You can start to feel a little bit disconnected, isolated from the real world. So checking in with the real world through radio, podcast, anything like that, trying to use your other senses as much as possible, basically, to give your eyes a break. Make a cup of tea, drink some water, have a snack. Anything you can do to keep your energy levels up will be really useful to your task. Put on music and dance around, as I've said. Physical exercise, very important. When you're sat at your desk and all the work you're doing feels very intellectual, like just getting up for 5-10 minutes and just jumping around, do some star jumps, jog on the spot for 20 seconds, any of these things. It just makes sure that, apart from anything else, you're not exclusively sat at your desk, at your table, on your bed. You're giving your body a little bit of a chance to get out of that sitting position, especially if, like me, you have maybe slightly questionable posture. Maybe do a few neck rolls, because, oh boy, does your neck start to lock up if you're sitting staring at a screen for lots of hours. So keep your body as engaged as your brain is, because it's easy to forget that it is doing as much work in this as your head is. On longer breaks, so lunch and that sort of thing, try to get outside, even if it's just to go to the shop and grab a pint of milk. Again, it's that reconnecting with the outside world. It's also just getting fresh air and sunlight, and it's something else for your eyes to look at other than the screen. So any rest you can give your eyes and your brain from the screen is going to help you work more efficiently. You're going to sleep better, so you'll come back the next day feeling fresher. But it is really important to make sure you are getting your breaks, because As soon as your energy starts to lag, there's really very little you can do other than take a break to get it back up again. And with energy levels on Zoom, it is that law of diminishing returns thing. So, you try and stay as on top of it as possible. And also, it's really hard on everyone in the room if one person's energy starts to drop. So to be a good, considerate collaborator, the most important thing to do is to take breaks. That is all from me for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.